Well, good morning, everybody. It's so good to be with you guys and to be here together in this place. Wish you all were here with us. We can't wait to get back together in this place. But for right now, this is our new normal, and it is actually the title of our series that we're going through right now, where really what we're talking about is how do we live, exist, and operate in fullness in this season of life. And as we began last week, we started off in the book of Daniel. We're going to be back in Daniel chapter 2 today, but really as we lead into today, what I think one of the things that has been revealed during this new normal is one of the greatest illusions of life. And the way I would phrase that is the greatest illusion of life is the belief that we have control over it. It may be different for different folks. I mean, it may be for you, the difference for you was maybe with your finances. I mean, you thought you had a good plan going in and nobody foresaw this. I mean, some of you, you're nearing retirement age, and I mean, you've been stockpiling this for years. This was not just like a couple-year plan. This was like a 2-decade plan, and now everything is changed. Everything you thought you had under control is not under control. For some of you, it was your family, the situation you had with school, education, and I know college students and high school students. I mean, they were coming up on prom and graduation and all these different types of things, and then all of a sudden, all of it's changed, you know? They thought they had it under control, but now it's not under control. For some of us, it's just ourselves. Like, I mean, just internally, you know, like it's that thing that, I thought I was doing pretty good. I felt pretty stable, but it just took this thing and it just rocked my world. And all of a sudden, I thought I was in control of my emotions, and I find myself like being emotionally out of control. My mindset, I felt like I had a good, firm foundation on things, but now the illusion that I was in control has been removed. And I've been confronted with this fact that, man, I don't feel in control at all. And when that happens, what it really reveals is a few key things for all of us. One of those things would be this, is our knowledge means that we're not wise enough. It's coming to the end of what we know. I mean, when it comes to like a virus like this, I mean, we were setting in with a bunch of pastors this week with some local medical experts, and they were briefing us and talking about how, like, you know, hey, this is what you can expect, and we're trying to make decisions about how to navigate this as a church and just as individuals and leaders in the community and all those kind of things. And man, there's just so many things that even as we sit and talk to them, they said there's some things we just don't know yet. Our knowledge is just not enough. Our wisdom is not wise enough. But not only that, but also we find out that the illusion reveals that our strength is not strong enough. You know, like I thought I was strong, and now I realize I'm not. You think our economy is strong, and now it doesn't feel so strong. And our best efforts, actually, the illusion is removed, and the control that we thought we don't have. But then at the end of the day, what's really troubling, I think, is that our best is not good enough. You know, I mean, you look at the situations going on, and man, you know, you're going to try hard, you're going to do things, but you can't necessarily stop the tide. You know, you can't hold back the ocean. And at the end of the day, when you feel all these things, when this illusion is removed and this lack of control is revealed, the result is you can just feel powerless. Let's just be honest. I mean, you just feel powerless. But today, what we're going to talk about in Daniel chapter 2 is that while that's a reality, while that's what we feel in this time, that the truth of that actually leads us to some deeper questions that hopefully Daniel 2 will point us in direction of some answers for. And so I want to lean in today, and I want to ask you two preliminary questions that would set the course for us. The first is this: what if the most powerful position to be in is to actually admit that you're not in control? What if it is to actually embrace the fact that you're not in control? As scary as that may be, what if the way to feel the most powerful is actually to relinquish and admit that you're not in control? And the second question I want to ask you is this: what if one of the first steps to actually finding your purpose is to consider that there is no power over you, there is a power over you that actually gives you and your situation meaning? What if there is something that actually is outside of you that can actually come into the situation and actually come into our lives, that in the places where we feel out of control and we feel powerless, we can actually find power and we can find meaning in the midst of an out of control situation. This has been the story of what faith in God has been about from the very beginning, and that's what you find in chapter 2. Of the book of Daniel. Now, we kind of did a whole intro last week to Daniel, the book of Daniel, the backdrop and everything. So if you weren't with us, then please go back and watch that. There's a ton of information in there. And as a matter of fact, I mean, we can't really cover it all. We're hoping people get into these journey groups online so that they can discuss this more and dig a little bit deeper in these things. And if you haven't done that, we really encourage you to do that. At the end of this message today, as a matter of fact, at the end of the service, we're going to throw some discussion questions up, and you can start your own. I mean, you can start your own discussion with people that you know and love, your friends, and just kind of dig deeper and begin to process this stuff, because this is not meant to be something that you just hear and go about your way. This is something that we want to assimilate and integrate into our lives, these deep truths, so that they actually help us to live deeper, more fulfilling lives and be able to operate in a new normal. So we encourage you to do that. Go back and listen, get into a group and all those type of things. But let me just lay a roadmap for us today, because this chapter, actually, we were just talking before the service, and it's like 49 verses, right? And so just to read that would be pretty much all of our time. And so we're not going to be able to read all of it. But what we're going to do is we're going to parachute in and summarize a few points to get to what we think is the real heart of the matter with this chapter and actually answers those questions for us. But in doing so, I want to lay a framework for you. I want you to see three primary things. The first one is, it's going to be a roadmap for us, is this contrast you're going to see, okay? There's a contrast between two individuals that you're going to see primarily in chapter 2. One of them is Daniel, okay? The book's named after him, Daniel, and the other one is Nebuchadnezzar, the king. And you're going to be able to, if you can kind of trace, juxtapose, contrast the two of those individuals, you're going to be able to see how they interact differently. And all those words are intentional to bring us back to the second thing I want you to see, which is actually the focus. The contrast actually is meant to bring clarity into the focus, that there really is one central message to chapter 2 in Daniel that becomes the answer for our questions. And then with that contrast and that focus, the way you see it best is to see it actually against a bigger backdrop. Okay, last week we talked about the backdrop of exile. These Babylonian guys, these young junior high boys, have been carted off. They're in Babylonian exile. They're in a foreign land. They have been basically introduced to all kinds of new situations, their new normal, and they're trying to live and operate in this new land and figure out how to navigate this new world that they're in that's pretty much antagonistic to their comfort. They are totally out of control. They are the definition of not being in control in this situation. But the backdrop of that exile is set in the setting of Babylon. And Babylon actually becomes an archetype throughout all Scripture. You can see it from Genesis all the way to the end. As a matter of fact, if you were to drop back in Genesis chapters 1 and 2, the creation narrative, the story, this is when everything was right, everything was good. Man and woman, they were together, everything was great. A man and woman with God, everything was awesome. And then Genesis chapter 3 happens, and they turn away from God. And then what you see in the first 11 chapters, actually from chapter 3 to chapter 11, is this downward spiral of events that lands them in Genesis chapter 11 in this story about all these individuals. It's the epitome of exile from the garden, where they actually build a tower. And I want to read this to you because this, I think, becomes the archetype for us to understand as the backdrop to that contrast and that focus, so that we can get to the heart of the meaning in this story. If you look at Genesis chapter 11, verse 4, this is what happens in that moment. They've been exiled. They are now coming to a place that will eventually become Babylon. This is what it says in Genesis chapter 11. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city." Notice the self-focus. "With a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we'll be scattered over the face of the whole earth." Now, here's where the archetype is introduced. The archetype is introduced in two primary things. One is they are self-absorbed. They are self-focused. This is an elevation of the self. They're building a name for themselves. And what is it? What's the motivation behind that? It's so that they won't be scattered. What is that? They're trying to take control. They're trying to take something that's broken, and they're trying to concoct or construct literally a tower that will actually bring them some sense of control in an out of control world. Well, this place has an interesting name. As a matter of fact, you get the name of it if you skip down to verse 9, and it says that this is why it is called Babel. Does that sound familiar? Babylon, Babel. This is where it comes from. The word actually means confusion. They were confused. See, this self-focus, this kind of obsession with control and self-absorption has actually led them not to more clarity and more power. It actually has just made them confused and deceived. This place, because the Lord confused their language of the whole world. Now, this is the very place that you find Daniel and his friends in. This is where Nebuchadnezzar is the king, and this is where the contrast actually begins to take shape against this backdrop. So let's dig into the story. We're going to read a little bit of it, and then we're going to drop into some sections, and we're going to see how we find the answers to those preliminary questions we asked. Look at Daniel chapter 2, verse 1. Fast forward a year from last chapter 1. In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. Okay, this is going to be really important. His mind was troubled and he could not sleep. And so the king summoned the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. Okay, and when they come in and they stood before the king, he said to them, I've had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means. Then the astrologers answered the king, may the king live forever, because this is a good thing to say if you're in front of the king. This is your job. May you live forever. Tell your servants your dream, and we'll interpret it. And then the king replied to the astrologers, this is what I firmly decided. Now check this out. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you'll receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me. Now, did you catch that? It's one thing if your job is to interpret the dream. Okay, that seems kind of far-fetched enough, right? But now, he's kind of up the ante on this thing. He's said, no, I don't want you to just interpret it. I want you to actually tell me what the dream was. I won't trust you unless you can actually describe the dream. Now, if that's you, what are you thinking in that moment? You're probably like, uh-oh, right? This is my job. I was here. I was ready to interpret the dream. And I don't know if they would have really had ability to interpret it or if they would have been able to make it up, right? Because, honestly, you kind of have the whole Carney at the fair thing, right? Hey, let me tell you your future, that whole thing. Is it like that? Or is it they really had this understanding, this cosmic understanding. And so I think while it's really difficult to say, to be honest with you, I can kind of sympathize with Nebuchadnezzar here. I'm not trusting this. If I'm really troubled, I'm not really going to trust this interpretation unless, it's kind of prove it. If you're really who you say you are, come on, bring me some evidence. And so what do they say? They say in verse 7, once more they replied, let the king tell his servants the dream and we'll interpret it. And then the king answered, I am certain that you are trying to gain time. You're stalling. Of course you are. Of course, because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. This is what you do in any situation like this. Maybe he'll change his mind. Lord, give me something to say, somebody help me out here. You totally are stalling in here, and he nails it. And then he says this, he gives them an ultimatum. He says, if you do not tell me the dream, there is only one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. Nailed it. The astrologers answered the king, there is no one on earth who can do what the king asks. And here's the foreshadowing. This is from the mouth of the people that are tasked with the interpretation endeavor, right? They're the first ones to voice in the passage. These people that don't have a faith in the God of Israel, the faith of Daniel and his friends, they're the first ones to foreshadow what we all know to be true. No one can do this. This is not possible, all right? So if you think these guys were just superstitious. There was some superstition, but they were also smart enough to figure out that this is just not possible. This is not the way it works. They're out of control. And they're the first ones in the passage to actually verbally give testimony to the fact that our knowledge is not enough. Our strength is not enough. Our wisdom is not enough. Our best is not enough. And so into that, the astrologers, they've got to answer him, right? And so they said, there's no one on earth who can do what the king's asked. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods. Now see where they start. They start with the understanding that they're out of control and they don't have what it takes. And so what do they go to? They go to the gods. They say, okay, well, there's higher powers out there. And Babylon had tons of gods. They had gods like a lot of cultures do for a lot of different things. I mean, whether it be the moon god, the sun god, God over the water, all these type of things. They would have all these gods. As a matter of fact, those names we talked about last week with Daniel and his friends, they actually got changed, each one of them, to a name that would become synonymous with one of those gods. And so we're going to take away your Hebrew God name. We're going to replace it with one of our God's names. And so there's an integration or that cultural engineering that was taking place. But they didn't have really, if you have a lot of gods, you don't have a lot of confidence. Let's just be honest, right? I mean, if I can have 10 gods, then this is what Paul, matter of fact, in Acts chapter 17, this is when he went into Athens. You remember the story? He goes into Athens and, man, they've got idols everywhere. There's got tons of gods. And then remember what they had? They had this statue erected over there, and on the inscription on it says, "To the unknown God." That is the epitome of no confidence, right? Like we got 100 gods up here, but we're still not quite sure. There could be the possibility that there's another one. And so just in case that God shows up and we missed him, we could say, oh yeah, but we had you covered right here. We just didn't know your name, right? And so this is kind of where they are. They're like, hey man, we don't have what it takes, but I mean, we're trusting that out of all the things in the world that there are some answers, and the gods, there's something bigger out there. And this is kind of that transcendence thing that we go to. And I find this in culture today, right? I mean, we see this all the time. I mean, it's kind of this battle between secular and spiritual culture. Like, I mean, you've got one side that says, well, obviously there's no gods. And so, we're going to talk about in a second, well, if that's true, then there's no answers. Well, if maybe there is a God or there is a higher power, then that actually begins to lean us into maybe there are some answers to this. Maybe there's something outside of ourselves. So it hints of this, right? I mean, so these answers that we're looking for, we're getting closer to them, but what we're seeing here is we're beginning to be introduced on the backdrop of confusion, out of control situation. Everybody's out of control. Nobody has answers. They're pointing outside of themselves, which is the first step to finding an answer. So these guys, these astrologers, they're actually pointed in kind of the right direction. They're looking outside themselves. Well, if you follow along with the story just down through verses 12 through 16, I mean, the king gets really angry. Matter of fact, he gets so angry, he sends out this edict that he's going to kill all of them, right? Now, remember who all of them would be. This would be Daniel and his friends. This is what they've been trained to do. This is what they've been in service of the king to do. They've become interpreters of dreams. They've become people that were spiritual advisors. And so, I mean, their lives are on the line. Their necks are on the line for this thing. And so Arioch, the commander, he goes out and he finds Daniel and his friends and he says, hey, listen, this is what happened. Daniel begins to ask him, it's like, oh, I mean, what got him in such a bad mood? I mean, what happened? And you're powerful, right? I mean, if you wake up in a bad mood, because we've all woken up in a bad mood, and the people around us like, man, they need to go back to bed, right? But when you wake up in a bad mood and heads are going to roll, then that's you trying to exert power. And so Daniel's confused, right? He's like, man, what happened? And so Arioch begins to explain this whole situation, and Daniel says, hey, just beg him to let me have an opportunity to interpret this dream. Just give me some time, which is really interesting because remember what Nebuchadnezzar was trying to keep them from doing? He was so paranoid and fearful because what were they doing? They were stalling. And now what's David doing? I mean, he's stalling, right? He doesn't have an immediate answer. And here, let me just kind of say, this is not in the center of this message or anything, but here's the thing is I think in Christian subculture, we are so quick to offer answers we don't yet have for situations. I mean, I've seen so many people that would come under the banner of Christ, under the church banner, on news outlets and doing all kinds of things. And they're offering up all these simplistic answers to what's going on in our world. And I think what we're doing is we're trying to fill the void so that people will feel more comfortable, but it doesn't make anybody feel more comfortable because we're offering answers we don't really have. And so what does Daniel do? Daniel rightfully stalls. He says, hey, I look at the situation. I don't have the answer. And this is an important place to be able to start, isn't it? This is the important place to be able to start to actually finding answers. The place where you begin, where you actually say, I don't know. I mean, I think for us, those of us that would call ourselves people of faith, people that have submitted our lives to Christ, well, that's predicated on or built upon the foundation of humility. I mean, oftentimes I think the church, Christians, and I think rightfully so, because the way we portray ourselves oftentimes is we don't come off as humble. We come off as, arrogant. We come off as arrogant because we think, well, we've got all the answers. But how did we find whatever answer we may have? We found it by first admitting we did not have the answer in ourselves. And so everything about the Christian faith should cause us to move down in humility, not move up toward arrogance. And so Daniel, what do you see in him? Well, you see it really played out if you skip down to verse 17, 18. See this contrast begin to develop between Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel in verse 17. Then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And what did he do? He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. All right. So, this sounds a little self-serving, right? I just don't want to die. Well, what would you do, right? Nobody wants to do that. But watch what he does, all right? Let's just isolate three quick things to help us to see the contrast. First one, what did he do? He admitted his weakness. What did he do? He went to his friends and he said, hey, plead for mercy. Plead for mercy. This is the first step to dismantle arrogance in our life. It's okay to admit weakness. It is the first step to admitting or acknowledging the illusion of control. It is the first step to actually finding that there's something outside of you that can actually give you and your situation meaning and context. But you've got to start by admitting your weakness. What's the other thing he did? He asked for help. He asked for help. He went to his friends. He's like, man, I'm in this situation. I bought us a few minutes. I bought us a day. Right? But I need your help. What do I need you to do? I need you to seek the Lord. I need you to pray. And so he didn't just admit he was weak. He went to others and he says, not only am I weak, I need others around me to help. Now, this isolates for us something really important for us. In times of weakness, who do you have that you can go to and ask for help? Who's in your life right now? The church was never designed to be an event primarily, right? It wasn't designed to be a corporate gathering. We come together and man, that's important. It's important for us to worship together. We're eager to get back together. But here's what I think when you get to Hebrews chapter 10 where it says, do not forsake the assembling of yourselves together. I don't think the writer of Hebrews had in mind lights and cameras and instruments. I think he had in mind relationship. I think he had in mind accountability. I think he had in mind, I'm weak and I need help. But often in the South, especially, I can say this, and I firmly believe this is true. Churches become synonymous with an event or a place or a gathering, rather than an actual relationship with a group of people where we can admit we're weak, where we can ask for help, and then where we can collectively do the third thing, which is acknowledge God. What did he do? He acknowledged God. He says, I don't have the answer. I need your help. But where are we together going to go to find the answer? And notice the difference in the passage. If you glance down into your scripture in verse 18, he says, the God of heaven. Now, what did he do? Here was the distinction between the Babylonian approach to spirituality and the Hebrew approach to spirituality. One was polytheistic and one was monotheistic. He uses a capital G God there instead of a lower G God to kind of cover all the bases. He says, no, we're going to the one source, the one creator God. So he admitted his weakness, he asked for help, and then he acknowledged this God. And then watch what happens in verse 19. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Now, see this contrast. Where did the dream start? Started at night, right? And now you've got it back, and where is he getting his knowledge? Where is he at? What time of day is it? It's at night, right? So here's the contrast. There's some similarities, and then there's going to be some distinctions. The thing about the night is, think about when you're most vulnerable and least able to do anything. It's at night, when you're asleep. This is the time when it is the pure definition of you can't do anything. You can't control anything. How many of you, right before you go to bed, you go and make sure the doors are locked? Anybody do that? Yeah, you do that. We could be all day with it open, with the doors open and unlocked. But as soon as, this is the question everybody, hey, did you lock the door? Hey, did you lock the door? Why? Because we know we're all vulnerable, which is the definition of being out of control at night. And so where does God choose to move? He chooses to move when no one else can take the credit and where they can't say, I came up with the idea. He comes to Nebuchadnezzar at night in a dream, and now he's going to come to David equally sleeping. And this reminds me of Psalm 121. You can jot it down and go read it later. This is an important one. It says that this God that we serve, the God he's going to, he never sleeps. He never slumbers. That means that when you are least able to do work, he's doing work. At the time when you feel the weakest, when you've admitted your weakness, this is the time where God displays his strength. And so what happens? Comes in and he begins to reveal to him the answer. Now, check out the way that Daniel actually describes this. If you look and you got your Bibles open, does the text start to look different in the next section? All right. The reason for that is it looks like a poem or a song, right? Now, when you're reading Scripture yourself, especially Old Testament, all across Old and New Testament, if you start to see that, when you see something like that, that's really important because that's the author's way. It's a tool, an instrument that they're using to bring you to the center of the focus. Remember, we've got this contrast going on. This little thing right here is like a musical. Some people like musicals, some people don't. All right. But it's like, okay, we're going to break into song. All right. And there's something powerful about that because what it does is it begins to take what you can kind of see happening in real time and it begins to give it meaning and understanding. And that's what he's doing. So this is where we're going to lean in and begin to get to our focus, right? So then Daniel praised the God of heaven and he said, praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and the seasons. He deposes kings and he raises others up and he gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness and the light dwells in him. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we ask of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king. There's a consistent refrain that's been happening and it's going to pick up steam. It's actually going to become more and more clear as we go on. But basically what is he saying? He says, when I was at the weakest, when I was sleeping, you came and you spoke. And what did you do? You revealed something. Now, the word revealed is really important because when you hear revealed, what it does is it actually reveals control, right? Now think about any HGTV show that you've ever watched, all right, or any home improvement show, all right? They do the whole show. They're working through the whole thing, right? The homeowners are gone or whatever, and they bring them in, and what do? This is the reveal moment. This is the reveal moment. And if you're the one that's doing the revealing, then that by definition means you're the one that's in controlling. You're the one that is saying now's the time, right? And so what he's alluding to here is I didn't have the answers, but there's something outside of me. When I admitted I didn't have the answer, that actually empowered me because now I could see the one who was truly in control. You know why it's powerful to admit you're not in control? Because it's the only time that you can actually see who really is. That's the only way you're ever going to see who's really in control. Something revealed means there was something hidden. There's somebody that pulled back a veil. That's what reveal actually means. Now, you want somebody that has this kind of knowledge, that has control in lots of situations, whether you've got a technical issue at home. I don't know how to fix computers, so I'm always calling somebody. Your car's broken down, you want to call somebody. Medically, like you're not going to trust just anybody, right? I want somebody that's got the real facts. They've got the experience, and they've got the perspective, and they've got the knowledge. And so what this presents to us is where I want to just hang out for just a little bit, okay? Because this becomes the crux of the argument for us, because oftentimes this is where people get hung up. This is where we take the leap from what I would say subjective understanding to objective understanding, okay? And this is where most people, they pick the fork in the road, like pick, the kind of Matrix thing. Hey, which one do you want? Which pill do you want? You want the red one or the blue one? Which one do you want to go? And it feels like too big of a leap, right, to go this route. I mean, Daniel's talking about this God, and he's the one who changes seasons and all those kind of things. And this is the big question of humankind. And so I want to hang out here for just a second, and I want to present three key things. And I actually picked these up from Callie, my 14-year-old, where we were actually listening to a message from Tim Keller. We were talking about, and he was talking about some of these same things. He wasn't using this pastor or anything, but he made some really good points, because what he's talking about is this leap between, I don't believe in God. And many of you today, like sitting at home, like you maybe have clicked on this, and man, you don't believe in God. You would self-identify as an atheist or an agnostic. You don't quite know where you fit, and you're kind of looking at all this stuff, kind of leaning in and scrunching your brow a little bit. And I totally get that. Because this is a big deal, all right? I mean, this is not just kind of some fable. This is like a really big deal. And so we've got to really isolate why we believe like what Daniel's doing here, it makes sense. All right, why it actually is an answer. And I'm going to present three key things really quickly. The first one is, I think that an objective understanding of creation and the world, that we're not in control, but there is a God who is actually more rational to believe than to believe that there's not. I think it's more rational. I think the other thing is that I think in times and seasons like we're experiencing right now, that it's actually more durable. All right, it actually can see you through in ways that are more of hey man, I'm in control of my own fate and my own life does. And then I think that it's actually also morally and socially more useful. It's actually more pragmatic. It actually helps more. So more rational, more durable, and I think it's more morally and socially useful. In order to do that, I want you to listen to, in 1988, there was a Life magazine article. Some of us remember the Life magazine. It's not around anymore, but 1988 it was, and the article in Life magazine was, what is the meaning of life? Okay, and they surveyed a lot of different people, a lot of different famous philosophers and biologists and spiritual leaders, pastors, and all that kind of thing. And they all kind of took their take on what the meaning of life is. And one of the individuals that they interviewed for that and quoted in that article was a guy named Stephen Jay Gould, who was a Harvard professor. He was a paleontologist and evolutionary biologist. And so this is what he said with this question about meaning. And this gets us into kind of the practical here and now, not in the Old Testament, but where we live. 1988, this is what he said. He said, we are here because one odd group of fishes had a peculiar fin anatomy that would transform into legs for terrestrial creatures. We are here because the earth never froze entirely during an ice age. We may yearn for a higher answer, but none exist. This explanation, though superficially troubling, is if not terrifying, is ultimately liberating. So get what he's saying. He's saying it's actually more freeing to not believe in God than it is to believe in God. We must construct these answers for ourselves. We've got to come up with the answers. All right. Well, that's kind of the basic definition of subjective understanding of the world. And I'm going to be really honest, it actually does work to some level. Right? People say, can you have purpose in life apart from God? Well, on one hand, yes. On one hand, no. On one hand, yes, because you can construct for yourself a way to approach life And you can actually reap the benefits of that. Like, I mean, if it's to pursue a career, like you got a purpose in life. It's to raise a family. I got a purpose in life, I'm going to try to work out and maintain my health. Okay, that's good. I'm going to do that. And studies have shown that if you have subjective purpose, it actually does help you, okay? It does help people, all right? But here's the problem with that. The problem with that is, though, that may be true for you to find your purpose, ultimately there's a problem that not just spiritual people, not just pastors acknowledge, but actual other philosophers and atheists would acknowledge there's a limitation to the ability that you have to find sustained meaning and purpose, to actually understand that there's something bigger yourself. In order to point you there, I want to give one more quote. This is Thomas Nagel. He was a professor at New York University, and he was a self-identifying atheist as well. But he began to try to isolate and identify even some of the fallacies and problems in his own understanding as it pertains to kind of these cosmic questions about control. And in a book he wrote, a very short introduction to philosophy, he said these words. He said, if you produce a great work of literature that continues to be read 1,000 years from now, eventually the solar system will cool and the universe will wind down and collapse and all trace of your effort will vanish. Man, that sounds like a really encouraging day. Mr. Rogers, okay. Ultimately, it won't matter if you ever existed. And after you've gone out of existence, it won't matter that you did exist. If your life has a point as part of something larger, it will always be possible, if there is no God, to ask, what is the point of that? Now, you can fill in the blank of whatever that is for you. It could be family. It could be ministry. It could be religion. It could be, I'm going to be a public servant. It could be anything. But what Nagel's saying here is he's saying, hey, listen, we have to be intellectually honest about the fact that, yeah, you may have subjective purpose. You might find an answer right now, but ultimately you have to answer the question of what's the purpose of that purpose? Because if the universe were to implode, in some ways it feels like it might be right now, in many ways, practically speaking, then you're left with the question, are you not? Is my purpose sustainable? Is it rational for me to have a purpose that's actually not something that's revealed outside of myself, but something that I construct? You see, what you're seeing in Daniel chapter 2 is you're seeing this dilemma, this tension that we all experience, that Gould and these guys, they were wrestling with, and we wrestle with. Is like, can I construct something? Can I construct a tower? Can I construct a kingdom if you're Nebuchadnezzar? Or can I find it outside of myself? Do I need to go somewhere else? And so I think it's more rational to think, well, you got to go somewhere else, because if you're constructing something and I'm constructing something, then there's no continuity, right? There's no universal continuity. There's got to be something outside of ourselves. But not only that, it's actually, if you go that route, I would say it's more durable. And here's why. I think if you're meaning that you find, the purpose that you find, what you've constructed, if it can be taken away by a pandemic, if it can be taken away by a natural disaster, I said national, that's true too, natural and national. If it could be taken away through either of those things, anything, then what that reveals is that your purpose is not durable. It's not durable. So if your family can be taken away, if your political affiliation can be taken away, if your relationships can be taken away, if your job can be taken away, if your ministry can be taken away, if those things can be taken away and you are left with no purpose, that is not a very durable way to approach the world and life. And in a season like this where you're out of control, I think what we're all confronted with is ways that maybe we've slipped over and we begin to trust in other purposes that are inside of us that we've constructed, rather than seeing that there is something bigger out there. And the result of that is that we begin to implode on ourselves and we begin to feel the strain of that. I mean, I've experienced that personally. When I've been the most depressed in my life, and I've had some depressed moments in my life, I've had some seasons where I've struggled. And where I've struggled is the times when I forgot that there was something outside of myself. I began to feel the weight of trying to construct something myself. I began to try to control situations. I begin to think that I had the power, the strength, and the wisdom, and everybody expected me to do it. That's the kind of thing that will lead you to the end of yourself, and you will get crushed under the weight of that. It is not durable. And we're all in that dilemma, are we not? We're all in a dilemma to say, I've got to look for something outside of myself because I can't carry the weight of constructing something myself. But then the last thing, and then we'll move rapidly through the end of this, the last thing is this: I actually think it's more morally and socially useful. Because without objective meaning that's revealed outside of yourself, because that's the passage, right? That's what he's saying. He's like, hey, this was revealed. This was outside of me. I didn't come up with this. This was outside of me. Then your morality and your ethics are not transferable. There's a lot of conversation right now about ethics, right? Well, what, do you go back to work and you expend, life? You put lives in jeopardy, or is economics more important? I mean, there's a lot of ethical questions rolling around, and it's really interesting if you listen to it, because if someone were to say to you, one position or another, well, I think we should go back to work. Well, I'm on the other side. I think we shouldn't because these are important. Well, you're in a problem either way if you have subjective morality and ethics. If there's not something outside of us that we can take and apply to the situations we're going through as a nation and as a world right now to answer the ethical questions that are in front of us, if it's political in nature or financial in nature alone, or if it's just personal in nature and you've got an emotional connection to the event, if those things are that, then there's no way for us to ever come to a resolution. Because I can't say my ethics and my approach is more important or better than yours. I can't make a value judgment or a value statement on your ethical approach. You say, well, that's not true. You could say, well, this affects the most people. Well, who's to say you're right? Who's to say you're right? I mean, if you're a complete evolutionist, then you would say, well, if it's survival of the fittest, then those two things become incongruent because I've got to advance myself at all costs. But there's got to be something outside of us that actually gives information and knowledge to the moral, social, and cultural questions that we're facing today. And if we're looking inside ourselves, it will become subjective at very best, and will actually begin, not as individuals be crushed under the weight, but our world will be crushed under the weight of that. And so what happens in Daniel chapter 2 is really, really important, because conversely, the most freeing that you could be, the most freedom you can find, the most empowered you can be is when you look to something outside of yourself, and I would say look to one outside of yourself. Because the God that he's talking about, he confounds all the limitations we experience. Some of those limitations, you know them all too well. I mean, as I'm getting older, I'm becoming into more contact with these. And the first one being time, right? I mean, time for me, it seems like it's just fleeting. And that's always been true, but I told Veronica the night, now I lay down at night sometimes, and it actually becomes really true for me. I'm like, oh gosh, there went another day. Like, where did that go? And I've only got so many of them. But when you look to God, the way that Daniel did, what did he do? When you look at the limitation of time, you're going to someone who in himself, nothing is future to the one who already is. There's nothing future. There's no time limitation to God. Capacity. I mean, I don't have the capacity to do things. Well, when you go to God, you've got the capacity question to answer because he's the maker and keeper of all things. That's why in Psalm 121, the psalmist can say, hey, listen, I can go to bed at night. Some of you are having a hard time sleeping. I've had a hard time sleeping. And most of the time it's because I've tried to bear the weight of control of what's going on in me and the world around me, my family, my friends, my church, all those type of things. But here's the thing, you don't have the capacity to control, but there is one who is the maker and the keeper of all things. You're limited by space. You can't be anywhere that you want to be at any time. You can be one place. But with God, he has the ability to be everywhere at once. That means that right now he cares as much about the people that look differently than you as he does you. The people that don't have what you have, live where you live. He cares as much about them, and he can be there and he can be here. Where you can't get to your kids, he can be there with your kids. But also not just your time, capacity, space, but also power. At the end of the deal, do you ever just say, man, if I was in charge, this is what I'd do? Well, he is unmatched and unrestrained in his power, unmatched and unrestrained. There's never been a political figure that has matched this. There's never been a kingdom that's matched this. There's never been an advisor or spiritual leader that has matched this. This God is unmatched and unrestrained. And so with this perspective, Daniel goes to Nebuchadnezzar. And what does he do? He says to him, hey, let me just tell you what was revealed to me. And as he begins to explain this to him, this is how he leads into it. Skip down to verse 28. I've got to hit a few more points and then we'll finish up. He says this, but there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. There's that word reveal. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come. Skip down to verse 29. It says, as your majesty was lying there, there's that posture of not being able to be in control. Your mind turned to things to come. Nebuchadnezzar, just like me and you, the revealer of mysteries showed you what is going to happen. The one who is unmatched, unrestrained, the one who has ability to be everywhere, the maker and keeper of all things, the one who is, he's revealing this to you. And so he tells him the dream. The dream, you can read it for yourself, but basically there's a statue, and it has a gold head, it has a silver chest, goes down and goes to bronze. Sounds like the Olympics that we're not having, right? The gold, silver, bronze. And then it moves down to the feet, and it's a mixture of iron and clay. And this is where everybody rolls out the murals and says, oh, let's see, well, okay, how close are we to the end times? Is Jesus coming back? But that's really not the point, okay? I mean, it's not the point. Maybe a fun parlor game or something, I don't know, but that's really not the point. The point of this is he's trying to show, it's a picture that the God that is the revealer of mysteries is revealing to a person where they fit in his plan, That there is an overarching narrative to the world, and we get so stuck in a moment, to quote the OU2 song, right? Stuck in a moment. We get stuck in a moment, and we think that this is the only thing going on, that we're the only people that it's affecting. But like this thing's been rolling around for a few millennia here, okay? And especially those of us in the West, we become this arrogance thing coming in. We become so focused, and we think we're the most important nation the world's ever seen. We're the strongest. But listen, we've only been around like a little over 200 years, and there's been a lot of water under the bridge before then, right? And so there's a humility with this. And so what's being presented in this dream is a revelation for Nebuchadnezzar of how he actually fits, a guy that was thinking he was powerful and in control, who was riddled with fear and paranoia, which is the way a lot of leaders that think they control things end up. They're paranoid, right? And he says to him, listen, I want to reveal to you where you fit. Now, he gets into the description, and there's this key description in it, though, that becomes the point. This is the focus, right? The contrast leads to this focus. And it happens down in verse 34. While you were watching the statue, he says, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay, and it smashed them. And if you skip down, it goes on to describe what happens as everything crumbles to the ground. And then eventually it says, the wind swept them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. Did you catch that? I mean, this is a beautiful poetic picture of reality. It's like this Nebuchadnezzar, he was constructing for himself a kingdom, an empire, something to make him feel important. Everybody heard of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon? I mean, what was that? That was a testimony to say, hey, come and look at what I've created, right? It was a testimony to your power, to your ability to control. Now, I've never created, I'm trying to learn how to build a little garden box and grow a few zucchinis or something like that. Never done a hanging garden. But I've tried to construct a lot of other things in my life that have given me meaning and purpose. And I think the message, if Daniel was to come and sit into my dream, I think he would say this, is he's like, whatever you're constructing, it would be smashed as well. And it would fall to the ground, and the wind would come and sweep it away, be blown away. Because what we construct is not sustainable. And in the midst of this dream, this is a guy that had a bad night's sleep. He woke up in a bad mood and he decided to kill everybody. If there's anybody that had some power and control, it was this guy. He was the guy that went into Jerusalem, remember, and ransacked it and took out all that God's stuff and took them back and threw them in his temple. So imagine you're Daniel and you're sitting in front of the most powerful person on the planet. There is not a more powerful person on the planet than Nebuchadnezzar right now. And you're saying to him, there's a rock that's coming. And it's going to smash you to the ground, and you're going to be blown away into pieces, never to be seen of, heard of again. Now, what he's revealing to him was actually this, is that there actually is a permanent king, and there is a permanent kingdom. One of the problems of society, secular society today, and when I say that, I just mean the mindset that says that, hey, we're going to construct some things. We have been, in recent years, probably more prone to than ever before trying to construct for ourselves a utopia. We want what Mark Sayers would say is a kingdom without a king. We think that we can create the greatest nation the world has ever seen. And we are in a battle. We've been in battle with other nations to do that. We're in battle with other nations right now to do that. But we're jockeying for position in a losing race. Because ultimately, the message of that is, no matter where you fall in eschatology and who represents what, the message centrally is this, is that what we build, kings and kingdoms will rise and fall. Nations will rise and fall. People will rise and fall. And if you think that you're in control, you're wrong. And you will actually be crushed under the weight of your control. The most powerful position you can be in, the most powerful position we can be in is to actually admit that we are not in control. Because in that point, rationally, morally, ethically, socially, durability, all those things, we can move into seasons of new normals where the seasons change and things look different, and we can attach ourselves to a permanent kingdom and a permanent king. So who is the rock? Why is the rock important? Well, finish it out, verse 44 and following. In the name of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. It's a permanent king, a permanent kingdom. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock. Now, I bolded that up here because I think Nebuchadnezzar thought this was the vision of Nebuchadnezzar. But what does Daniel say? It's not about you. The vision, the key to the whole thing is not about which nation is which. The key to this is who is the rock, because the vision is the vision of the rock. The whole dream, the whole thing is about who is this permanent king, where is this permanent kingdom, and how do I become a part of it, a civilian in that kingdom. And so this is the meaning of it. It's cut out of a mountain, but not with human hands, a rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold pieces. Everything that's of value in this world, it's demolished by that. The response was this: the king said to Daniel, surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings. And what is he? Class, he is a revealer of mysteries. And so you see the contrast to the whole thing, right? And so the focus is who's the rock, and the rock is the revealer of mysteries against the backdrop of confusion. So doubling back to our questions, why would we assume that we can become more powerful by trying to hold on to control? What are the things in your life right now you're trying to control and you feel like everything's going crazy? What if the answer to the power you're missing in that is to actually admit you're not in control and quit trying to struggle and strain to control? What if in this, the meaning and the purpose that you're looking for out there, you've been asking a lot of deep questions with everything going on, spiritual questions and questions about yourself and the world, and is there a God, and if so, why is all this happening? You're asking all those questions. If you're asking all those questions, could it be possible that getting to know this revealer of mysteries that was true then and true today, could it be the fact that in doing so, you could actually find the meaning you're looking for? It could be the first step to finding the meaning you're looking for yourself, because it's outside of you. It's not subjective, it's objective. And it actually could help you see in context, in the grand narrative, this situation we're going through right now, the situation you're living through right now specifically. Because ultimately, who is the rock? Well,
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
oh, yes. Siri asked, I didn't quite catch that, so I'm going to repeat it. I don't know what that was. I don't know if that was, I did say Siri. Yeah, I said Siri. Okay. That's why I am, see, Apple's in control, apparently. Okay. All right. John 16:33, Jesus said these words. He said, I've told you these things so that you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. See, Jesus was honest about the fact that things are going to be out of control, or it seem like they are. He said, man, you're going to go through things and you're going to have some trouble. And we got some trouble going on, right? But there's something about the power outside of yourself to realize that I don't have to be in control because there's someone who has conquered the world. Now, this is right before Jesus goes to the cross, which contrastly or ironically actually looks like the world conquered him, right? But through the resurrection, this rock, this stable rock came back. And now, as the Apostle Paul said in Philippians, he said, now he has been exalted above every name. And at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. You see, the rock that Daniel was talking about was the one and only Jesus. And the key to unlocking the door to your control, to ask, what can I do when I don't know what to do? There's only one place to run for that. The one who has overcome the world. And in doing so, what does he do? He says that you can have peace. Peace is the most powerful thing you can have. Control is the opposite of peace. Because I've never been successful because I'm not smart enough, I'm not strong enough, and I can't be everywhere and do everything. My best is not enough. But there is one who is perfect that overcame the world for us. And so as we finish up today, if you've got spiritual questions, a couple of things to do. One, you can click a button on there. It says request prayer or need prayer. Some of our hosts there, they would love to chat with you a little bit and pray with you. If you need prayer about anything or you've got spiritual questions, that's the best way to do it. You can also email us at info@journeyjonesboro.com and we'll be right in touch with you. We want to help you in that. And then what we'd encourage you to do is get in discussion about this with someone. Talk with somebody. We'll throw some discussion questions up here in a minute at the very end of the service that kind of lead you and guide you on your way. And we're here to help however we can because we're going through this thing together, but we're doing it in faith because we believe that Jesus has overcome the world. And so we believe that for you, and we want to encourage you with that today. I want to pray, and we're going to sing one song, and then we'll be out of here. Heavenly Father, we thank you today that you are on your throne, God, that you are unmatched and unrestrained. Lord, there's been a lot of names that have come. I mean, there's been a lot of big names. And we're reminded in a season like this when a lot of the names that we would look to that have power and prestige and all those type of things, when, man, it seems like their name doesn't mean what it used to be. It doesn't carry the same weight, the same power that it used to in this new situation. It wasn't durable. It wasn't sustainable. And so, God, today we look to the name that has never been threatened by a pandemic. We run to the name of the one who is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. The one that was there in the very beginning that spoke the world into existence. You are the maker and keeper of all things. There is none like you, Jesus. So I pray for my friends out there today that are wrestling with really difficult things. They're in some trouble right now. And I pray, God, that you bring them to peace because you've overcome it for them. I pray that they would be courageous enough to ask for help, admit their weakness, and begin to acknowledge you. And I pray, God, that we would walk with them through that and ask and open, honest questions so that we could get to the right answers together in that. And I pray, God, today that you'd be exalted in this place, because we want to pour our lives out for you, because you are the only one who poured out your life for us and offered us the hope that we have. You're the only name that we run to, Lord Jesus. You're a sustainer and our friend. In Jesus' name, amen.